above that, at the level of the organization above that. And for me, the role, I had reservations about taking it. I had, sort of turned it down, before I eventually ended up sort of accepting it. And we don't need to sort of get in those reasons there, but ultimately, like, the position I went into was different than the one I left, even though it was in the same company, which is, I think, important to sort of talk about, because as a chief of staff, the principle you support and your alignment with that principle, I don't want to say it's the only thing that matters, but I can just tell you, if that, right, um, and so when I realized I wasn't aligned with my principle, and from a values perspective, I was like, man, I need to do something different. And eventually, I had a chance to step away from that role. And when I was reevaluating what I wanted to do next, right, I was like, okay, I'm going to focus on this kind of backlog of coaching clients and consulting projects that are fun, that I want to get to. And finished my MBA finally, after starting it a long time ago and pausing. But I was like, I need to be really intentional about what I do next. Right. And
Yeah.
so I was like, I need to take my own advice. I need to write this down. I need to hire a coach, because, as much as I had shown up the way that other people needed me to help their development, I realized nobody was doing that for me in my network, certainly not for free. And so I just said, the best people, if you think about in any discipline, have coaches, right? Think about like Simone Biles, think about, Tom Brady, Tiger Woods, LeBron James. They've had coaches their entire careers, right? And I think in a sports context, we think that's normal, right? But when we think about, like, in the business context, like, how many people do you know that hire coaches for themselves?
Right. Right. It's not. It's not as prevalent, and it is such a key part of being able to grow, being able to step outside of yourself and understanding,
Uh,
how do I get better at? Because, like you said, like, you're not going to be good at everything. And
right.
I want to be good at a lot of things, but in order for me to be good at some things, there's sometimes that I just need the help. I mean,
Yeah.
your example with the coaching makes sense. And the example that all of us have heard probably ad nauseum is working out. Like, you're never going to get a stronger muscle sitting on the couch thinking, I'm going to be stronger. You actually
Yeah.
have
Let
to
me
do the work. So, yeah, go ahead.
let me give you one more analogy. So I love analogies. I'm a very visual learner. So I love, and as a storyteller, like, I like to create analogies and metaphors. Um, have you ever tried to renovate a house?
I built a house. My husband and I built two houses. Oh my gosh.
Okay. So imagine the difference between doing that yourself and hiring a trained professional. It's not to say that you couldn't figure it out, right?
Sure.
It's just you're going to get there faster and with a lot less headache, right? And so when you think about that, like, I can just tell you the number of times where I thought I could do it myself. I mean, hiring other people to stand on the shoulders of giants and leverage their expertise. I mean, I've hired, a stylist. I've hired, an executive coach, and some people, are lucky enough that, like, if they're high performers, their companies do some of these things for them. But, like, if you want to show up different, then you've got to do something different. If you want to be exceptional, you have to do the things that the exceptional people do. And again, it's a really privileged statement to be able to say, like, I was able to do those things. But if you're able to do them, great. And if you're not, find those people in your network who can at least get you further, right? So yeah, hire a stylist. Yeah, the stylist thing is interesting, because I just was like, hey, in my professional career, and I feel like I've become more sophisticated, but I realized I hadn't really, like, upgraded my wardrobe uh, since, like, high school. And when I finally, like, hired a stylist, I asked around for people, and they recommended somebody to me. And I remember, we had a conversation. She said, "Who's your style icon?" I was like, "I don't know, you." I was like, and I, like, didn't even, like, I had no reference frame for the question. And she's like, no, like what guy do you think is really stylish? And I was like, oh, Justin Timberlake. She's like, why? And I was like, well, because his style is, like, really timeless and classic, and it's not like fast fashion like Justin Bieber. And she's like, do you only know fashion for guys named Justin? And I was like, no. Anyway, so then she helped me, and that was like in 2017, and it completely changed. It made me feel better. I was more confident. I showed up better. And so it's like those things that you don't really sort of think about, like, yeah, make a difference. And it's all additive.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. So I want to go back to something that you said, which was the power of your why. Like, there was a why behind this. And one of the things as chief of staffs is we navigate when things are going well and we're like, oh, nice, it's very quiet. But that's not typically what's going on in our world. Usually there's chaos. Usually there's burnout. Usually there's a lot of transition, things that are happening. How did your manifesto help you navigate those different types of situations?
Ooh, I mean, that's a great question. You're right about the chaos. Like I'm back in another, full-time chief of staff role now for a C-level executive. And, that's just par for the course, right?
Yeah,
Um, there's just no getting around that, especially if you're in like a relatively large company. And so for me, I had to step away. I needed to take a break. When I realized I had gotten to a place I thought I was going to be successful and I thought I was going to be, happy, and then I wasn't, I was just like, okay, well, what's missing? Like,
yeah,
everyone's like, oh, you have this ideal role. Like, are you happy? And I was like, no, I'm not. Right. And that's when, when I realized like the main thing was like, there was a real misalignment of, my values. Like, and so it was hard for me to articulate to someone if they asked me the question, what do you need? And so I was like, well, I need to spend time thinking about that and refining it. And I could, like I said, there was too much to hold in my head about what I needed and, what I was passionate about. Cause when I do executive coaching, I'm just trying to boil down all the information they're sharing and hold them accountable to themselves so I can help them get to the intersection of what they're good at and what they're passionate about. And I realized that leveling the playing field and correcting for systemic inequities was something I was really passionate about, right? And I didn't want it to just be virtue signaling. Like I really wanted to be able to use my privilege and use my outspoken voice to help, advocate for building bigger tables when there's so much language about building higher walls. And so I was like, I know those people exist. I know those leaders exist. I need to figure out where they are so I can find them. And then what does that look like for me? Like how do I support that kind of work if I'm really passionate about it? And um, you know, I have a daughter, right? And I want her to and sisters and all that stuff, people in my network. Like I want them to see people in power that look like them, right? And so can I support someone and send those signals that like, yeah, have you seen the new Barbie Dream Gap ads?
mm-mm.
Is really powerful, right? And it's like girls at 5 years old stop thinking they can be president, and parents are 3 times more likely to Google, is my son gifted as my is my daughter gifted, right? And I just, that just doesn't sit well with me, right? And there's a line in it, and it said, it was something like, we need to see brilliant women being brilliant, and we all have a part in making that happen. And I take that seriously, right? Like I was like, you're right, we do. um and so yeah, like all those things I really wanted to kind of capture and write like how that showed up for me and what I wanted to do. And so like I said, I started writing it down.
Awesome. So first, I'm glad that you mentioned your daughter because she's adorable. So Bryan is a new two-time dad, right? This is your
Yes.
second one. And so you have a adorable son and your daughter. And I know that you're probably thinking about these things with your son in general because you want him to grow up in a world where equity is the norm, inclusion is
Yeah.
the norm, and it's not something that we have to figure out how do we make things more of. And then, you have this beautiful little girl who's born to you. And you shared a little bit about how you started thinking differently. What's something that you found that you're doing today that directly was impacted by the birth of this cute little one that's in your life now?
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, I want to support all the women in my life, right? So it was these things I was doing beforehand, but like for example, just a simple reframing of some things, right? I tell my son he can do almost anything that a woman can do, right?
Mhm.
Because you can't give birth to someone, right? But other than that, like they're equal. But we always hear it from the other way around, right? So I want to just I want to change that framing. So it's little things like that. Um, it could be something as subtle as like we don't use Alexa, right? Because I don't think it's good to send a subconscious signal to people that it's okay to command a woman around, right? Um, and
Wow.
and then just like even when I did, or if I hear them, like you still have to use your manners. Like Alexa, can you please tell me what the weather is today?
Right.
And I think like it's those kinds of things that like when you think about like how you're showing up and you think about like those systemic inequities and how they show up, a lot of times they're really subtle and we don't even realize them unless we look for
Yeah.
them. So
Yeah. Yeah. That's actually a really good point. And I didn't even think about that with Alexa. Now it's got me thinking about all of the assistants. That's another topic. So we're
right.
not,
Yeah, let's not get into that rabbit hole.
oh my gosh, because you just, yeah, that's a can of worms. But so and I want to tie this back into again, because this manifesto, this idea of the manifesto for me has just been kind of groundbreaking as I'm thinking about it. Another thing that you brought up is like it's framing around like the things that you're willing to do, but it also is framing the things that you're not willing to do. So you've got to be very honest with yourself as you're being very introspective about this is who Bryan is, this is how I'm going to show up. And these are the parameters by which, when you are working with me, you can expect these things. And if you are a high achieving person, you've got to balance that with being a human being. How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to say something like maybe like a little bit of a hot take because I've also volunteered as a personal financial literacy coach. And I
Yeah.
talk about like, I think we talked about this before, right? Everyone talks about the power of saying no, but they don't talk about the privilege of being able to say no, right?
Mm,
Um, Being able to walk away from a role is a luxury a lot of people can't afford.
correct.
And
Yeah.
I recognize that. But the reason why I was able to do that was a series of small decisions over a 20-year career, right? Of living within my means, not taking on a lot of debt. Like in the military, when you apply for a top secret security clearance, um, they do a credit check, right? Because if you have financial, sort of responsibilities or liabilities, you're more corruptible, right? And I think a lot of people tolerate things or tolerate boundary violations because they aren't able to walk away, right? So if whatever you can do to position yourself to be able to walk away, and don't get me wrong, like very few people are able to not work, right? Like, and I'm not
Yeah.
in that situation, right? I can't say that, but I have put myself in a situation where I can walk away from work because I'm not living paycheck to paycheck. And I realize, especially now today, like with income inequality and all that kind of stuff, like um, that's a real challenge for a lot of people. So when I say that, I'm not saying that ignorant of those constraints and stuff, but I'm just saying like there are things that are within your control, right? I just tried so much to focus on what I can control because there's so much that I can't, and that's one of them, right? So thinking about how you can set yourself up for success by not um having these commitments that if you stopped working today you couldn't meet tomorrow, right? That's a lot of stress and anxiety, and so it keeps people trapped, right? It keeps people trapped in all kinds of relationships, right? Not just work relationships. And so I think just like thinking about that and being intentional, when I do coaching, I like to draw all these concentric circles, and I draw like that to illustrate like how they overlap, right? A lot of people come to me and around a career conversation, whether it's at work, if it's someone that's on my team, if it's someone who's just looking for mentorship, if it's someone who's actually in a formal coaching arrangement or agreement with me, and I'm just like, look, you can't solve for one variable in a complex equation and expect that you're going to solve it, right? And so if the sort of complex equation, the result is to get to a healthy and happy and fulfilling life, right?
Mhm.
You can't just optimize for your career and then not have healthy family relationships or romantic relationships or good friends or health, and
Right.
you got to solve for sort of all of those things. And so financial sort of health comes into there as well. And so I think about thinking about that holistically, as opposed to, because you can tell like in my thinking there isn't just thinking about, well, what I want in my career, right?
Right.
um I think about one of these things in here just to give you an example of to help illustrate this question that you asked, which is like what I need from the role, how I see the role at its best, what I need to be successful in my next sort of career. All those things were sort of baked into here. And so I had a section of like how I translate that philosophy into actionable tactics, so like people understood how that was going to show up at work. So
Mhm.
like the first one, I'll just pick that one, right? Prioritize ruthlessly. Like if you're like, I'm a business strategist, so like, so I always say like everything's important, nothing's important. If you're someone who's not willing to like pare down what your team is doing, like, and like, we're not going to work well together, right? And so why would I put myself in that situation where I'm going to be set up for failure from the very beginning? Like, let me just define these things, because when the right person reads this, they're going to say, that's what I want, that's the person I want on my team, and they're going to invite me in, versus me having to say, like, force my way in and say, I'm the right person for you, when I could be a square peg and they have a round hole.
Yeah, yeah. So, so that leads me to two questions actually. When you wrote the manifesto, you wrote it as an overarching framework for yourself. As you moved into different positions, did you adjust it,
Oh,
thinking
yeah.
about? So, can you talk us through, like, what was the thinking behind that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big adjustments I made was when I was trying to figure out, like you said, how I wanted to show up, with my values, and I added a whole section. Maggie Olson, she runs Nova Chief of Staff, and she's obviously a woman and a former chief of staff, an advocate for women in the position, and she posted a bunch of data, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, yes, that's what's missing here. I'm going to grab that data and I'm going to write my response to it, and I'm going to embed that in there, and I'm going to sort of tag her so more people can see her content, because I do think that's really important, is when you see content that resonates with you, sharing it does so many things for you, right? It shows people, this is what I care about, and so they can engage with you, people in your network that maybe you didn't realize you shared something in common with. But it also tells the algorithm what you want to see more of, right?
Mhm.
And so I think that's really powerful. So anyway, so yeah, I added that whole section. I reached out to Maggie and told her I was going to do that. And of course, she was super supportive. She shared a couple other things. Like, that was one way I did it. Some ways, I had some conversations with some hiring managers, and I was like, oh, I need to add that, right? And that's the great thing about these kind of online documents that just aren't static, right? It wasn't in a notebook. I could edit it, and it's persistent, right? It's out there. So like I'm accountable to, like, people said, Bryan said this, right? So if someone sees that read it and sees that I'm not, like, honoring that, they can ask me why, and we can have an honest, non-defensive dialogue about it, right?
Yeah, yeah. The other question that I wanted to ask when
So
you were talking about this is, you shared this with your manager. And how was that conversation when you talked about your manifesto?
yeah, well, first I shared it with the recruiter, right? And for some, like, getting a high level chief of staff position is really hard.
Yes.
Um, a lot of the people that I talk about in the job market right now, there's a flood of really good tech talent because of the layoffs over the last 2 years. There's a ton of talented people out there, and the chief of staff role is really zeitgeisty. Like, if you look at the data from last year, it was like a 5,000% increase in the chief of staff role. And so a lot of people are interested in doing that role. But what I don't think a lot of people realize, especially at high levels, which is where I really think that the role should be, I think some of the junior chief of staff roles are probably better with a different, ops title, but it's a
Hmm.
different topic. When you're a high level executive, you've built a network of people that you trust, and right or wrong, they bring people with them, right? Or they say, hey, I need a chief of staff, I'm going to go grab this person from my network. So a lot of these high level chief of staff roles are posted only for compliance reasons. And so, if you don't have an internal referral, like, your resume is, like, not coming out of the stack. And
Yep.
increasingly, I mean, you've referred me to roles before, and I didn't get an interview, right? If you don't have someone who's willing to, like, bird dog you with the hiring manager, like, for these high level chief of staff roles, like, good luck. Like, it
Right.
really needs to be like, you need to talk to this person for these reasons, or, at least in the current job market, like, you don't really have a choice of getting an interview. I was talking to someone who the other day opened a rec for a high level chief of staff role, and in 3 days they got 700 applications, and they just closed the record. Like, we can't even like go through that many, right?
Right. Right.
And so
Well, and it's wild because I will talk to people all the time who are looking for positions in the chief of staff world, and I tell them it's a numbers game. You have got to make sure that you're in that first 100 if possible, because you may be the absolutely perfect candidate. They're just not going to see you because they can't scale to looking at that many. And you've got some hiring managers who literally want to look at all of the resumes, and others that use tools. Like, there's a lot of different mechanisms that are used to figure out, how do I whittle this down to my top 20? And if you're 21, like you're 21 and you could be perfect, but you're 21.
But I mean, let's also even think about that.
Yeah,
20 is insane, right?
yeah,
Do you want to interview 20 people for a position? I don't.
yeah,
And
yeah,
there's and those 20 people are probably very deserving, right? So you just, when you think about it like that, when you waterfall it down like to one position, like it's tough. So you really have to, like I said, you really have to rely on your network, which again is why something like, bringing it back to the topic, why something like the Chief of Staff Manifesto is important, right?
yeah,
If you could say, hey, I have the perfect candidate for you for Chief of Staff, and by the way, they wrote this article. I think it's exactly what you're looking for. Like, what candidate do you know could compare to that, right?
yeah,
They might be equally qualified, they might be better qualified, and you might get the interview over them. So it's just, there's so many reasons to write it down and put it in a place that's like persistent for people to find and reference, because that's one of the things I learned at one of the best things I learned at Amazon. There was a lot of things I liked about that, there was a lot of things I didn't like about working there, and one of the things I loved was this culture of self-service documentation, right? The idea of, like, I'm all about transparency. I want to share as much information with as much people as possible, and I want them to do the same, because I want to get together and work with people who are like-minded, so that we become more than the sum of our parts, right? And when I think when you do that, um, it creates what, we've talked about the concept of updrafts versus downward spirals, right? I want to do things that, like, continually make things more positive and better where I am. And so it's just this kind of stuff that does that, right? And if somebody says, wow, I can take this and I can use it and I can adapt it and it helps them get a job, like, great. If somebody takes it and uses it and says, hey, this is a good example of how people are advocating for diversity, equity, and inclusion in an environment where more and more people are questioning that, even though the data says it's insane to do so. I don't know how it's going to help people, even if it's just, hey, how do we have a conversation? How do I have a conversation with someone who feels this way, and I want that to show up in my life more? And so, what are some ways that I could do that in my life? Like, I've had so many conversations just from writing this and writing other things, that, like, that's what I think, it's worth putting your ideas out there. And it didn't go viral. There's not 1,000 reposts or 100,000 likes, but, like, that's not why I wrote it, right?
right, right. And I want to go through the thought process behind when you're writing this, because when I sat down to write mine, it wasn't something that I did in 5 minutes. Like, it takes a lot of intention, because you're thinking about, again, your value system, some of the things that we've already discussed. What are you going to do? What don't you want to do? What are the boundaries? How does somebody know the best way to engage with you? How long did it take you to come up with your first manifesto? And then how often are you refreshing it?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I think because like I said, I've written it. I wrote the first one like almost 2 years ago now.
Mhm.
um, and I've iterated on it quite a few times, sometimes in a minor way and sometimes in a much more substantial way, like I mentioned earlier. But it just started with getting some thoughts on paper, right? Like,
Right.
what's important to me. We talked about, you know um, Simon Sinek's, The Power of Why, and there's a new book that I've read recently, by a guy called Dr. Michael Gervais. And if you guys, um, I dropped my link to LinkedIn on, in the chat. I can share it. I don't have the book, Dr. Michael Gervais's book, off the top of my head, but they're all talking about defining your purpose and defining your why. And
Yep.
Simon Sinek's book literally is, it starts with why, right? And
Yep.
so, writing that down and writing what's important to you, just in bullet points, like, get something on paper to start. And now, even with, like, AI, I mean, with ChatGPT, it'd be so much easier. You could have them interview you, right? Like, you could just say, as a world-class leadership coach, I want you to, you know, interview me by asking me questions one at a time to gather more context, with the ultimate goal of helping me write a manifesto. It doesn't even have to be a Chief of Staff manifesto. Just write a
Right.
personal manifesto about how I want to show up at work and in my career. Like, it's super easy. And then it's going to ask you questions, and then you're going to give it answers, and it's going to help you refine it, right? And you can use AI as a thought partner to help you get there faster than I probably did. Um, but the key is just to start, right? The key is to realize, like, it's a thing that you want to do, and to take one step forward. I take for granted that I have the activator skill, and that's not a problem for me. But for a lot of people, especially like a lot of people that I coach, they have a hard time like stepping out of their comfort zone or taking initiative, especially when it's to do something for themselves. A lot of times they have a lot of easier time doing it in service of others, but for themselves it's hard. So yeah, whatever those barriers are for you, just recognizing what they are, getting them on paper, and then, if you need it, shop those around with people and say, how can I help? But again, you can do it. You can do that now in the safety of your own sort of bubble with AI, right? Because it's such a powerful, tool.
Yeah. Something that you had said that I want you to share with my viewers is when you created this manifesto, you used it for a little while, and then it actually helped you not move forward with a specific position because that person, and I don't remember if it was the organization, but at least that person, you're like, it didn't feel right to you. And I would,
It was more than one position. Yeah.
yeah, I
So
love
yeah, I mean,
that.
it took me 18 months to find the right role, right?
Mhm.
And it was because I had the manifesto, the right role was not the role I would have chosen previously, right? Because a lot of times, whether I would like to admit it or not, consciously or subconsciously, I selected the role based on what the proverbial they thought I should take, right? Or I should do. And even when I do coaching, like I listen for kind of these red flag words, like should or could, right? I should be doing this. I should be at this point in my career. Like, well, according to whom, right? And so I just
Yeah.
said, like, I'm done doing things for my resume. And so, I had, a chief of staff offer from a company in the fantastic or the Magnificent Seven. I had another one from another, Fortune 25 company, and they were great roles. But like when I talked to the principal and I shared my manifesto as a follow up, like even if they didn't read it, right?
Mhm.
Like that's also fine. It's
Right.
something that's important to me, and the right person did read it, right? And as soon as I got on the interview with my current principal, like I just knew she was the right one. And I knew the recruiter had shared my manifesto, and I knew she read it and was excited about it. um, and so the role that I picked was, you know, less than less less than half of the comp and a lower title at
Mm.
some of the bigger and more prestigious companies. But I was like, look, I had a big title and everything that goes along with it at a sort of probably better known, maybe more well known company. But like these companies are all made up of people, right? And you realize like I got to work with people every day. Like it doesn't matter how much money you're making. It doesn't matter, what the level of prestige is. If it goes against your values, you're gonna be miserable. Unless you're someone who just like is a mercenary and will work for as a hired gun for anybody. That's not me, right? Like so, I just realized like what I need to be happy is not. I mean, I want to be fairly compensated for my work, but like, going in at a director versus a senior director. I mean, that was a conversation I had. They're like, this role scoped as a director. I was like, well, yeah, but that's not going to take anything away from my capabilities, right? So I'll go in there and, you know, I know that I will outperform at that level. And if I'm recognized for it, then this is the type of organization that I want to be at. And if it's not, I'll go to one that sees my value and sees my worth.
Yeah, thank you for that. When you were writing this manifesto, you obviously had a desire with how you hope people would see you and how they could interact with you. Has that changed over time with the different opportunities that you've had and how you've kind of kept it very evergreen?
Yeah, I mean, that's such an apropos question because I'm going through, I mean, I've been in my new role since February, right? So I'm trying to learn how to not let the little setbacks and stumbles change who I am, right? I think when we talked the other day, I shared, I got some feedback that I was condescending, right? And I would never want anyone to feel that way after having a conversation with me. And I asked for some examples on where it was, and they came from a meeting from a project that I took over that was a really high visibility project that was going to fail, and we had to turn it around and we had to reset expectations. And so what I said was like, I appreciate the feedback, right? I'm not going to invalidate anyone's feelings. If I made somebody feel, oh, I didn't make anybody feel anyway, but if they felt that way after a result of my interaction, like that wasn't my intent. And I recognize the context in which it happened because I had worked 2 80-hour weeks, I was tired. I wasn't at my best, which I acknowledged, but I said I was still working to be my best, right? And I was trying to move things forward with positive intentions. And so, I took the part of the feedback that I needed to, and I left the part that I didn't think applied, and I went and had conversations with the people who felt and the opposite of how I wanted them to feel afterwards. And now we're also with the benefit of time, they can see that the project's turned around, it's back to green, like everyone's feeling good about it. But like at the same time, like I had to sit and say, well, what do I need to hear? What do I need to absorb? And what do I need to like let wash over me? Right. Because for some people, like directness or holding them accountable, which might be new for some people or in a different way than they're used to, might feel to them like it's condescending.
Mm-hmm.
But it's what's necessary to sort of move things forward. And I'm used to a really high ownership environment, like from some of the places I worked. And so, that it's a different culture, right? So I just have to realize like I'm trying to thread a needle, right? I'm trying to
Yeah.
earn trust and with the team. And that happens over time by me showing up the same way. So what I realize is the best way for me to answer your question, and the best way for me to earn trust over time is to just focus on what I can control, showing up the same way with the same kindness, the same positivity, the same respect. Um, and then they'll eventually see that when they ask me something and I deliver, when I take something on and I deliver it with a high bar, and that I care, like hopefully what I hope is that other people say, well, man, I used to care like this, and now I see someone else caring like that. I'm going to care like that again. Or actually,
Gotcha.
I don't want to work like that person's working. I'm going to go somewhere else. Right. And so I hope that like eventually culture is the hardest thing in an organization to change. I hope it's so strong that it creates functional turnover and reduces dysfunctional turnover. Right. So functional turnover
Right.
being, you know, someone leaves and makes the team better versus regrettable attrition, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So folks, I'm gonna pause here for just a moment because I want to open up the floor for questions that you might have for Bryan. I still have a ton of questions that I can ask him, but I want to hear from you. We want to hear from you. We want to hear the questions that you have. While you're typing those questions away and thinking about it, what I wanted to share with you is that we do have a guide that we're going to give to everybody who's joined the call that walks you through some of the things that you need to think about as you're creating your very own Chief of Staff manifestos. What are the questions that you need to be asking yourself? What is the why? What are the value systems that you want to make sure that are incorporated in the way that you work? How do you take your manifesto from a nice thing to something that's very actionable that you walk away and you're like, I've got steps, I've got things that I'm going to do. Getting to a place where you can share that with your boss, a potential. I love the fact that Bryan, you shared that you gave it to the recruiters. Like you went into these interviews telling them, here is me on a piece of paper, something that you need to know about me. So I don't see any hands that are up. If you want to type your questions in or raise your hands, either way would be great. And Bryan, as we're waiting for some more questions, what I'd also love to learn about with this manifesto is like what is the next thing? Like how did you start to make it actionable? Like what was the thing that got you from I've got it down on paper, now let me walk the walk at this point?
Yeah. I mean, writing it down like helped me internalize it, right? So I mean, I've been speaking to the manifesto this whole time. Like I don't like I'm not looking at it,
Hmm.
right? I don't have it memorized, but I know what's in it, right? I can if I close my eyes, I can see like the different sections. Um, and I think that's what takes any exercise, right? Whether it's building a program management, or a project tracker, or writing something down like this. The difference between creating a template for someone and then creating, a document that is meaningful and drives different decisions or meaningful actions is in not just the intention but also how you use it, right? So I go back and I look at this every once in a while, when I'm thinking about something hard.
Hmm.
I will try to run it through this filter, like is this, like I had an interaction the other day in a meeting with someone, another senior leader on my team who ironically was the same person that had given me the feedback about people saying my communication style came off as condescending. Someone who was in a meeting, I thought condescending towards me. And I went back to this, like how important emotional intelligence is, right? And like in the moment, I took a deep breath, and I just remembered, Brene Brown said, I'm going to probably butcher it. I'll paraphrase as best I can, but you don't have to accept the invite to every fight or argument that's offered to you, right? And it's so powerful. Like, and I was like, I don't know where this feedback's coming from, and I actually didn't disagree with anything she said, but I had made a comment about actually something from Dr. Michael Gervais's book. He calls it FOPO. And I had said, hey, maybe some of the people we were talking about why some of the people on the team like didn't, felt like they didn't want to share when we were trying to ask for things to make the team better, right? We're in the storming phase of like forming, storming, norming and performing, right? We're in the storming phase. And so we're having some difficult, uncomfortable conversations. And I just basically said, yeah, fear of other people's opinions, FOPO is what he calls it, can be, a really constricting aspect on human creativity, right? Now there are other aspects, right? And this person said, well, there's cultural differences, and it's, it's going to take them a while, you have to earn trust. And I was like, everything she said, like, I agreed with. But I was just like, look, if I get defensive, if not push back, like, it's not going to help move this meeting forward. Like, I have that, like, it violated a barrier for how people talk to me, but I chose not to react in that moment. And I was like, I'll deal with this later. I'm gonna let time pass and I'll deal with it later. So like, it's little things, but those little things are all additive to like how you show up, right? And I was just like, I'm not gonna let it change who I am. And even though I didn't appreciate that somebody didn't give me the benefit of doubt, I've also realized at this point in my career that it might not be about me. It could be that person had a difficult interaction with their family. It could be a million other things that had nothing to do with me. And so if I give that person grace, hopefully they'll give the next person grace. And then again, we create that updraft, right?
Awesome. It looks like we do have a couple of questions for you. The first one's coming from Adam. Thanks for this question. It says, how do you communicate your unique approach or value, your proof points of your experience and how it translates to chief of staff roles and opportunities? How do you cut through the noise? That's a great question.
We talked a little bit about how we cut through the noise, right? When I got my my offer from the role I'm at now, the recruiter said, I've been doing this for a long time. He's been an executive recruiter for like 20 years. He's like, I've never seen a candidate like you. And when I first met him, he said, I don't know who you are, but I know we need to hire you. We don't have any open roles. I'd actually applied for a different role. And I reached out on LinkedIn via a LinkedIn email to the CIO and said, hey, I got a high level, chief of staff referral from another C-level executive. And I didn't get an interview. I didn't get contacted, much less an interview. So I want to let you know you have a breakdown in engagement in your hiring process that's preventing you from attracting top talent. Now, there's a lot of confidence and competence in that. And that's what hiring managers ultimately are looking for. Everybody wants to both work for a leader that is competent and confident. Yeah. And hiring managers want to hire that, right? And so if you can convey that in just a few short words, I was saying a lot there without saying it. I wasn't being arrogant. I was just saying, hey, this is the situation that happened, and I want to let you know there's a breakdown, right? Because at the very least, I should have gotten a no thank you. Like, the fact that I didn't get a contact tells me one of two things, right? It tells me either you didn't find out about me, which is the breakdown in engagement, or you did, and your process isn't representing you well because, today's referral that doesn't work out could be someone that could help you later on down the line, right? So just how do you cut through the noise? You've got to realize that people are busy. You've got to try to sit and see like what the hiring manager is, and you've got to try to figure out like, well, what are their problems, and am I the right solution to those problems? And also to be okay with saying that if the answer is no, that's fine, right?
Right.
That's part of the confidence and like the self-awareness of like, hey, I'm not the right solution to everybody's problem.
Right. Awesome. We have another question from Kushbu. How did your MBA help you shape your journey as a chief of staff? Oof.
Whoa. I'm gonna do my best to keep the lid on Pandora's box for this one, because you and I,
Yeah,
we've had some conversations about this. Your MBA, I'll say this: your MBA is what you make it. Just like all the stuff we've been talking about, right? Like any template, and like if you go in there and you want to check the box, that's what it's going to be. If you go in there and you're looking for ways to learn and ways to build your networks that are genuine, you're going to have a different experience, right? I will say that my expectations for going back to my MBA after having, so, a decent bit of career success and achieving a certain level of strategic,
sure.
like working at that level of, the strategic decision making level of business. Because I think one of the things that people, specifically with the MBA as an advanced degree, it's different if you're going to be a doctor or a psychologist or something where you need that extra training, right? But one of the things, the biggest mistakes I see people making is right after undergrad or a few years after undergrad, they're just trying to learn like the basics of their role and like how they fit in the organization. They go get an MBA. Now, if you did that and you were working in like engineering and then you're like, well, I have no idea how this business world works, like that's probably fine. But if you like had a business undergrad and then you went and you just got an MBA and you weren't like a CPA trying to get the extra hours to sit for your exam, like it's such a huge waste of time and money. Like you really need, I think, a reference frame to be able to understand some of that material. And so like I'm very opinionated about this topic, and I did have a good net experience, but I will just say it came nowhere close to my expectations. And it was only because I chose, after being kind of mad about that, I chose to have a different experience.
Yeah, yeah. And the thing that's interesting to me, because I've had an opportunity to talk to a lot of different chief of staffs, and the ones who have an MBA, they literally liken being a chief of staff to an MBA in practice. Because
Yes, yes.
because of the things that you're involved in, because of the work that you're doing. And it's not to say that the MBA is not a good thing to have. But if you're looking for the field time, being a chief of staff is going to give you that field time that will equate to you getting that MBA. So I really appreciate that you said that. Gabrielle.
That's a great segue into Gabrielle's question, right?
Yeah. So Gabrielle, I'm going to jump into your question, but before I do, I wanted to share one more screen with everybody, and then we're going to close with your question. So let me go ahead and open up my screen. So what I wanted to remind everybody, let's get that. There we go. What I wanted to remind everybody before we close with Gabrielle's question is that these webinars happen on a monthly basis. It's the first Friday of every month, 10 o'clock Mountain Standard Time. If you join this one, you could have elected to join the others. If you want to make sure that you join the others, just go back to your Zoom link and make sure that you click that you want to get the notifications for these that are happening. Next month, my guest speaker, so I'm very excited about this because I get the best guests. Like I've got Bryan today. You have been fabulous. Next month, I'm meeting one of our senior executives from Microsoft. He's a corporate level vice president, and he's bringing not only his chief of staff, but his admin. And the four of us are going to have a conversation. So typically
Yes.
get like two people in that mix. I'm getting all three of them in that mix. And
I
we're,
love it.
yeah,
I'll be there. Like these are such great opportunities to learn. Like
yeah,
the fact that like there's no barrier to entry. Like, and you're trying to democratize like access this information. Like I love it.
yeah.
Um,
So, no, I
I
was going
do
to say,
want to make sure we have time for Gabrielle's question though.
yeah,
And I think it's awesome that you're giving people like this guide. Um, is it cool if we answer her question?
yeah. Let's go ahead and answer a question. I just wanted to make folks aware that this is not the end. So go ahead and answer,
Yeah,
Gab.
this is awesome. I'm so happy to be a part of this. But your question about like, what do I do next, right? Like that's a hard question. What I want to say is like what I tell my coaching clients is like, I love that you're like, here's where I am, right? I have this engagement matrix that I the first thing I do is I make people plot on this 4x4 engagement matrix that I came up with. when I was at Amazon to try to help people figure out exactly what the question you're trying to ask. Where am I now? And in my current role, can I job craft, right? Can I move up and to the right if the axes are your strengths on the vertical axis, on the horizontal axis, what you're passionate about, right? Can I ask my manager to do more of the things I like and less of the things that I don't like to move up and to the right if the upper right quadrant is highly engaged, right? And so then when you're like, okay, now I figured out where I am, where do I want to be, right? So the bottom quadrant I call it's terrified, right? Because you're not using your strengths or what you know, but you're really passionate about it. So for me, that's like brain surgery, right? I think brain surgery is really cool, but if you handed me a scalpel and pushed me through the doors of the OR, I'd be terrified, right? So that's not the kind of scared I want you to look for. What I want you to look for is right on the edge of that scared, like that terrified bucket. Because you should, when you take a new role, it should be a stretch. Otherwise, what's the point, right? And every time you go from that terrified and you move up into the right and you take a new role, you start over, every one of those cycles hones your strengths, right? So thinking about that and then thinking about from where I am now to where I ideally see myself, right? If you see yourself being like a badass chief of staff like Anne Marie at one of these big companies, how are you going to get there, right? And what I would caution people on, and this is something that I have to tell myself because of the strengths finder strengths I have a futuristic, I can see these ideal end states and then I've
Mhm.
activated, which is like I want to go straight there. But like people that come to me like for coaching sometimes are like, well, I'm not a chief of staff today. I want to be a
Yep.
chief of staff for a C-level executive. Ideally, I want to do it in this other domain that I don't have any expertise to. I'm like, holy cow, how many pivots do you want to try to make in one move? Right? People who win like chess masters, they don't look at the board and say, well, how do I go from where I am to checkmate? They plan out all the moves right in their head. And then if the board changes a little bit, they know, oh, cool, I've got to just like make a different move. But ultimately they're looking at like, how do I get to checkmate? And so
Yeah.
that's what I would tell you is like, don't try to make all the moves in one go. Like it's okay to say like, oh, cool, I want to move over here and like learn this other skill. Then I want to move over here and learn this other skill. I might move down and over because like the number one like biggest success factor for me about being a successful chief of staff is diversity of experience, right? Like
Yes.
there's so many things we're called on to do as chiefs of staff or like an internal consultant, and if you've only been broad like narrow and deep in one area, like chief of staff might be a stretch, right? So I have a lot of thoughts on that topic, but I really wanted to make sure we answer because there's probably some other aspiring chiefs of staff on the call, so I hope that's helpful.
No, that's super helpful. Again, so we are at the top of the hour. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Bryan. You have been amazing. Folks, I've added the link to my calendar. I would love to connect with you to see if you've got any further questions, if you need some assistance, anything to help you understand more fully this Chief of Staff role. And if you're curious about the Chief of Staff Academy, Gabrielle, some of the question that you asked, right in the wheelhouse of the things that you would learn in that academy. And so everybody, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Bryan, thank you again.
Yeah,
I know
anytime.
we're adding some more. And everybody, have a great day.
You too. Cheers, everybody.